Serving divorce
It's
papers
over,
to your
Catherine.
8-month
Sign the
pregnant
papers.
wife is already cruel. But for James Morrison, it becomes catastrophic when the woman he dismisses as ordinary turns out to be the missing heiress to an $8.7 billion steel empire. What he thinks is a clean exit from marriage is actually the first move in a war he cannot afford to fight. And once Victoria stops pretending to be small, his entire world begins to collapse.
Serving divorce papers to your pregnant wife is a terrible idea.
The
For
merger
James
must be
Morrison,
finalized by
it was a
Friday.
life-shattering
Derailment is
mistake.
not an option.
He
I
thought he was just
understand the
trading his
stakes,
quiet
Mrs.
wife,
Albright.
Victoria,
It will be done.
for a glamorous young actress. He thought it was a simple upgrade. James had no idea what was coming. His modest wife was not who she seemed to be. She was protecting a secret so huge it made his $40 million fortune look like nothing. Victoria Sterling Morrison was not the nobody he married. She was the missing heir to an $8.7 billion steel dynasty. Those papers did not just end the marriage, they woke a sleeping giant. This is a story about a cheating husband who chose to underestimate the wrong woman. It is about secret fortunes, corporate battles, and the best revenge you can imagine. James Morrison is about to learn that some women do not get mad, they get even, and they change everything. So prepare yourself for the most expensive divorce in history. The coffee cup fell from Victoria's hand and shattered on the floor. The noise was like a gunshot in their quiet Beverly Hills home. Dark coffee spread over the white marble tiles. "Divorce papers," she whispered to herself. James Morrison stood there, coolly adjusting his expensive silk tie. At 36, he had the same sharp face and calculating eyes that had attracted her 5 years earlier. But today, his handsome features seemed to be carved from ice. "I wanted to talk to you about this," he said. His voice was cold and professional, like he was ending a business deal, not a marriage. "My lawyer said serving you formally was the best way." Victoria's hand went to her stomach. She was 8 months pregnant, feeling small in her simple nightgown. He stood there in a full suit, ready to conquer the world. "Your lawyer," she said slowly. "Not our lawyer," he replied. "Obviously, we need different lawyers now." James stepped around the broken cup, keeping his expensive shoes clean. "I already have a settlement offer prepared for you. You will be very well taken care of course." His words were casual, but they hit her like a punch. 5 years of marriage, he was ending it all, like a simple transaction. "When?" she asked. "When did you decide this was over?" she repeated. James walked to the counter and poured himself a glass of juice. "Let's be honest, Victoria," he said. "This has not been working for months. We just want different things. You want a fairy tale life in the suburbs. I need someone who understands my world and my ambition." "Someone like Amber Delacroix?" she asked. The name filled the space between them. His jaw tightened just a little. "I have no idea what you mean," he lied. "The hotel receipts in your pocket, the charges on our credit card, the late nights at work for the last 3 months. Victoria's voice was steady, but inside she was falling apart. "I am pregnant, James. I am not an idiot." For a moment, he actually looked ashamed. "Amber understands my business," he admitted. "She gets the networking and the public life. You never did." His words were meant to hurt her. "You wanted me to be a simple husband, content with a normal life. That is just not who I am. That is not me, and it never will be," he finished. Victoria stared at the man she once loved. She searched for the person who used to comfort her during storms and bring her soup when she was sick. He was gone, replaced by this cold, ambitious stranger. "What about our baby?" she asked. "We will arrange custody. A 50-50 split to start." He talked about their child like another asset to be divided. "My lawyer says it is all standard procedure." A cold realization washed over Victoria. This conversation was going to change his life in ways he could possibly understand. She thought of a phone number she had memorized but had not dialed in 7 years. "What do you mean? My condition?" she asked. "Are you talking about the pregnancy?" "I am talking about your emotional instability," he said. "Your mood swings, your paranoia about Amber, pushing our friends away." "You mean your friends," she replied. "The ones who knew you were cheating and said nothing." James finished his juice and put the glass in the sink. "I have a meeting in 30 minutes. My lawyer will call you. I will be staying at a hotel for a few days to give you space." He started to leave, then stopped. Without turning, he said, "I did love you, you know, but love is not enough. I need a partner who adds to my success, not hides from the world. After he left, Victoria stood alone in the kitchen that once held so many dreams. The bright morning light felt cruel, showing every crack in their perfect life. She walked to their bedroom, each step feeling heavy. On his nightstand, she found what she was looking for. It was a black lace undergarment that did not belong to her. It still had a faint scent of a different woman's perfume. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. Thanks for a great weekend. Can't wait for our trip to Cabo. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her. While she planned a nursery, he planned a vacation with his 25-year-old girlfriend. With steady hands, she picked up her phone. She dialed the number she had held in her memory for 7 years. It rang twice. Sterling Steel Industries, Margaret Sterling's office. Patricia, it is Victoria, she said quietly. I need to speak to my grandmother. Oh, Miss Victoria, it has been such a long time, of course. Hold on one moment. The silence on the line was heavy, filled with the weight of all the years she had been away. Then, the strong, commanding voice of Margaret Sterling came on the line, and Victoria felt her own strength return. Victoria Catherine Sterling, her grandmother said. Hearing her full name made Victoria sit up straight. It has been 7 years. I know, grandmother, it has. You are calling now, which means something is very wrong. Victoria closed her eyes as she felt her baby kick. It is time, Margaret, she said. James Morrison has no idea he just declared war on the wrong family. A long pause followed, full of unspoken power. I will be on the next plane to Los Angeles, Margaret said at last. And Victoria, welcome home, my dear. Meanwhile, Amber Delqua was celebrating in her own apartment. The sun lit up her blonde hair as she danced. At 25, she knew timing was everything in life and love. Today, her timing was perfect. James had sent her a text message just a few minutes ago. It said, "It is done. Victoria knows. We can finally be together." She immediately dialed her agent. "Richard, it is Amber. I have news that will change everything. James Morrison is getting a divorce." Her agent was overjoyed. "Amber, this is perfect timing. I was just on the phone with Netflix about a new series. If you are dating Morrison, the publicity would be huge. It could launch your career into the stratosphere." Amber admired her reflection in the mirror. "We are not just dating, Richard. We are getting married as soon as the divorce is final." Her agent was speechless. "Amber, do you know what he is worth? He has investments in real estate in 3 states. You could fund your own movies." The thought made her dizzy. She grew up with nothing, fighting for every chance. This was her moment. To her, James Morrison was the grand prize of a meticulously planned game. She thought, I understand his value completely, and I know my own worth, too. I offer beauty, youth, connections, and drive equal to his. When the doorbell chimed, she practically danced to the door. James was there with a Louis Vuitton bag, wearing the proud smile of a man who just won big. "Hello, gorgeous," he said, wrapping her in a hug. "Ready to be with a man who is almost divorced?" "It feels like my destiny," Amber said, and she truly believed it. Inside was a diamond bracelet that cost more than a luxury car. The jewels glittered like tiny stars. She carefully clasped it on her wrist. "James, this is stunning, but you are the only gift I need." He sat on her sofa and said, "I want the world to know you are mine. No secret trips. No more hiding us. I will take you to big events, introduce you to my partners, and show you off like you deserve." Amber leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What about Victoria? How is she?" "Better than I thought." She was very calm. I guess she knew this was coming. James gently stroked Amber's arm. "She will be fine. Victoria has always been able to handle change. And the baby?" A brief, unreadable look crossed his face. "We will figure out custody, the usual schedule. Weekends, holidays, and summer breaks later on. It is just standard procedure." Amber agreed, but she quietly doubted anything about a newborn was standard. She dismissed the feeling. Victoria chose to be a stay-at-home wife. Amber chose to be part of a Los Angeles power couple. "I want to handle this perfectly," she said with care. "I do not want people calling me a homewrecker who ruined a marriage. We should probably wait a bit before we go public." James looked at her with serious eyes. "Amber, I have waited 36 years for a woman who gets me. I am done waiting. Life is too short, and you have to take chances." His intensity made her feel a little nervous, but she did not know why. "You are right, of course. I just want to manage this correctly. Trust me. I built a $40 million business from scratch. I can handle this. $40 million. That amount still shocked her. Where she came from, that was impossible money. The kind you only see in movies. But James spoke of it as a simple reward for hard work. So, Phil, tell me about the financial settlement, she said, getting comfortable. Do you think Victoria will demand half? She can certainly try, James said with a smug grin. But I have a solid prenuptial agreement from the best lawyers in the state. Victoria signed it without a second glance, as I recall. She was just so happy to marry me. The coldness in his voice made Amber look at him. She had never heard that cruel tone from him before. It did not match the charming man she thought she knew. But you did love her once, right? In the beginning? I believed I did, but now I see I just liked how simple she was. She was not like the other women I knew, so straightforward and real. That was nice for a time, but now I need a partner with my kind of ambition, someone to build an empire with. Victoria just wanted to live a normal, quiet life. But I am not normal, Amber, and neither are you. She pulled him into a kiss, tasting his ambition. Through her window, the lights of Los Angeles stretched out, a city of new beginnings. She was born Amanda Kowalski in a tiny town famous only for corn. She was Amber Delacroix, an actress about to marry a millionaire. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he answered. I will give you everything you could ever want. Across town, Victoria Sterling was in a doctor's office, listening to her baby's steady heartbeat. The baby is perfectly healthy, Dr. Williams said kindly. But I am concerned about your stress, Victoria. A divorce is hard, especially now. I will be all right, doctor. In fact, I think I will be more than all right. You do have support, do you not? Family to help you? Victoria smiled, her hand on her stomach. Oh yes, doctor. I have family, much more than James Morrison could ever guess. Dr. Williams gave her the ultrasound pictures, and Victoria put them in her purse. She had phone calls to make and a plan to start. It was time to reclaim a legacy she had tried to leave behind for 7 years. James Morrison believed he was leaving a poor, pregnant woman with no help. He was about to learn that Victoria Sterling was hiding a lot more than sadness. She was hiding an empire. The Sterling estate in Pittsburgh was built in 1892 by her ancestor, who turned one steel furnace into a national powerhouse. The grand old mansion had seen 5 generations of family history, but it had never seen a drama like this one. Margaret Sterling stared out the library window at the rain. The glass itself was older than the First World War. At 62, she still had the powerful air of a top chief executive officer. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her expensive suit showed her status. The library walls were lined with rare books and photos that told the story for over 100 years. The main portrait was of Thomas Sterling, Victoria's grandfather, at the original steel mill in 1958. Mrs. Sterling, your granddaughter is here, her secretary announced. Margaret turned as Victoria walked in. For a long moment, the two women just looked at each other. It had been 7 years since Victoria left this room, rejecting the family business and the Sterling name. Now she was back. 8, pregnant. She wore a simple dress, but her green eyes showed a quiet strength that was unmistakable. Victoria Catherine Sterling, Margaret said at last. You look exhausted. I am, grandmother. I am exhausted from pretending to be someone else. And who were you pretending to be? A nobody. Just a woman with no connections or power. Victoria's voice was firm, hiding her hurt hope that if I was ordinary, someone would love me for me. It seems ordinary women are thrown away too. Margaret pointed to the chairs by the fire. Sit, my dear. Tell me about this James Morrison. Victoria sat in her grandfather's old chair, where he had taught her business at just 8 years old. He is exactly who you would think. He is driven, cruel, and thinks he is better than everyone. He started Morrison Innovations himself, and it is now worth $40 million. $40 million, Margaret said, as if it were a tiny amount. How cute, grandmother. He gave me divorce papers today while I am carrying his child. I understand. And you find this shocking? Victoria's old anger flared up. Yes, I do. I know you hated our marriage, but I believed James loved me. I thought we were building a life, not that I was just another one of his assets. Margaret poured 2 glasses of water with slow, perfect motions. Victoria, 7 years ago you called the Sterling name a burden. You wanted to escape our family's influence. I was 22 and full of dreams. You were 22 and foolish, Margaret corrected. She handed Victoria a glass. You cannot run from who you are. The Sterling name means more than just money, Victoria. It means power and duty. In our world, men like James Morrison are hunters. People like us must be hunters too, or we become the prey. Victoria took a sip of water. So what should I do? Use our money to ruin him? I am suggesting you remember who you are, Margaret said, picking up a leather folder. Any idea what sterling steel makes in a year? I have been away for 7 years, grandmother. I honestly do not know. $8.7 billion. We manage 30% of America's steel production, have facilities in 12 states, and more than 40,000 employees. Margaret placed a folder on the table and laid out the financial reports. We also have large shares in 3 major investment firms, 2 shipping lines, and a very nice portfolio of real estate nationwide. Victoria just stared at the figures, trying to grasp the immense scale of it all. The company she left behind was a regional success, not a national powerhouse. These numbers showed a completely different reality. How?
Your grandfather may have founded this company, but I spent the last 20 years making it grow. While you were playing house out in California, I was creating an empire.
Margaret's smile was razor sharp. Did you think I would let his life's work just fade away? But why did you not tell me? Why did no one say how huge the company was? Because you made it perfectly clear you wanted to be left alone. You chased your number, sent our letters back unopened, and would not answer my calls. Margaret's voice became a little softer. I honored your wishes, Victoria, but I never gave up hope that you would come home. Victoria felt tears coming, and she quickly blinked them away. I was so mad at you, at grandfather's plans, at the idea that I had to fill a role I never wanted, and now Victoria looked down at her belly, where the baby was kicking as if it was part of the conversation. Now I have another person to worry about, someone who should not have to see their mother tossed aside like garbage. Margaret leaned closer, her eyes locked on Victoria. Victoria, I have to tell you something. It is something that might make you see your husband's divorce papers differently. What do you mean by that? For the past 2 years, Sterling Steel has been buying up shares of Morrison Innovations. We did it quietly through other companies. Nothing can be traced back to our family. Victoria felt all the color drain from her face. How much? 41%. To be precise, we are the majority shareholder in your husband's business. The silence that came after was absolute. Victoria looked at her grandmother, and the cold realization hit her. You knew about James and his affair, the divorce, all of it. I knew James Morrison was the type of man who would eventually let his true self show. I have been getting ready for this moment for 2 years. The moment, Victoria, when you would need the Sterling name to keep you and your child safe. But how did you know about Amber? About the papers?
Margaret smiled like a chess champion at the final move. Darling, you cannot believe I would let my only granddaughter marry a man without looking into him, could you?
I have had investigators watching James Morrison from the day you said you were engaged. Victoria felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Her entire reality was twisting into a new, frightening shape. You have been watching us for 5 years. I have been protecting you. There is a big difference. Margaret collected the documents and put them back in the folder. James Morrison thinks he is divorcing some poor, helpless woman. He has no clue that he just started a war with a family that has been winning its fights for generations. What do you want from me? I want you to come home, Victoria, for good. I want you to accept your position as my heir and the next leader of Sterling Steel. Margaret's voice was both strong and kind, and I want you to teach James Morrison precisely what occurs when a person disrespects a Sterling woman. Victoria stood up with care, her hand on the small of her back. From the library windows, she saw the lights of Pittsburgh start to sparkle in the evening. This city created and destroyed empires with the very steel that built the nation's skylines. I need to make a few calls, she finally stated. Of course. Patricia has the suite ready for you, and Dr. Elizabeth Chen from the hospital will be by in the morning to check on you. Victoria stopped at the door. Grandmother, when you say James does not know who he started a war with, what does that mean exactly? Margaret Sterling's smile was sharp enough to be a weapon. I mean, my dear, that tomorrow morning James Morrison will find out his wife is not the nobody he assumed she was. And by the time we are done with him, he will wish he had treated you with the respect you are owed. As Victoria walked up the grand staircase to her old bedroom, she felt a strength she had not felt in 7 years. The power of her family name was like a suit of armor. James Morrison made the biggest mistake he would ever make. He just was not aware of it yet. Victoria went back to the Beverly Hills house one last time. The sun shone through windows she once called home, but the house now felt like a set for another person's story. James was in the bedroom, carefully packing his fancy suits into leather luggage. He had always been a very precise man, and he was leaving with that same business-like manner. "You are back sooner than I expected," he commented without looking up. "I assumed you would want to miss this. I just needed to grab a few things." Victoria walked to her dresser and began collecting things for her trip to Pittsburgh. "When will you be done?" "This afternoon. I am taking my clothes and some personal things. The house has to be sold as part of the deal, so you should start thinking about where you will live with the baby." He talked about tearing their life apart so calmly that her chest ached, but her voice remained level. "I have already made plans."
Good. I am happy you are being sensible about this.
James folded a shirt with his usual perfect form. "My lawyer will contact you to arrange a meeting about the settlement. I think you will agree that I am being quite generous. How? Considering you came into this marriage with absolutely nothing." He said it not as an insult, but as a simple fact. "I built all of this, Victoria. The home, the cars, this life. You just came along with me." Victoria felt a cold knot in her stomach, but she just kept packing. "I understand. I am not being harsh, but we both know the truth. You do not have a job, you do not have any money, and you have no family support. That prenuptial agreement we signed prevents any crazy demands." He went to his bedside table and gathered his expensive watches. Victoria saw him packing the Rolex she gave him on their first anniversary. She had saved for 6 months to buy it, selling jewelry her grandmother gave her as a girl. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When did you know that our marriage was finished?" He paused with a platinum watch in his hand. "To be honest, about a year ago, maybe even more. You began wanting children, wanting to settle down, wanting me around the house more often. It was clear that we wanted very different things in life, so you found another person who wanted what you want. I decided to be honest with myself instead of living a lie." James's tone made it seem like this was something to be proud of. "Amber understands my drive. She wants to create an amazing life with me, not hide away in a boring home." The doorbell rang, and Victoria heard footsteps she knew. Rebecca Hayes stood in the bedroom doorway, looking very angry. "James Morrison, you are unbelievable," Rebecca said immediately. She was Victoria's age, but had a confidence that showed she never questioned her own value. She had dark hair and a sharp gaze and had been Victoria's best friend since their college days. "Rebecca, this is a private matter," James said coolly. "Not anymore." Rebecca crossed her arms and gave him a look that could make powerful men nervous. "I wanted to see for myself what kind of man serves his wife with divorce papers when she is 8 months pregnant. This is more complex than you realize." "Oh, I realize it completely. You found a younger woman who makes you feel good about yourself, and you decided to upgrade. The fact that your wife is about to have your child is just a small problem for you." James snapped his suitcase shut. "Victoria and I grew apart. It happens. We are dealing with this like adults." "Adults?" Rebecca's voice went up. "You are leaving a pregnant woman for an actress who is half your age. There is nothing adult about that, James. That is just being selfish with very expensive lawyers." Victoria watched them, suddenly fascinated. For 5 years, she had tried to be the peacemaker between them, downplaying Rebecca's harsh words and making excuses for James' cold attitude. Now she wondered why she had even tried. "Rebecca, it is all right," she said in a quiet voice. "James has made his decision. We just have to live with it." "No, it is not all right, Vic. You do not just get to." Rebecca stopped talking and looked at Victoria's face. "Hold on. Something is different. You seem different. I am 8 months pregnant and getting a divorce. Of course I seem different. But no, this is something more." Rebecca tilted her head, a familiar look she got when solving a tough problem for her marketing company. "You appear, I am not sure, more powerful somehow." James picked up his suitcases and walked to the door. "I will be staying at the Chateau Marmont if you need me for an emergency. Otherwise, direct all questions to my lawyer. After he was gone, Rebecca started helping Victoria pack baby clothes and other items into a new suitcase. All right, tell me everything. Where are you headed? And why do you have a look like you just remembered a vital secret? Victoria sat on the bed they had shared for 3 years, placing her hands on her stomach. Rebecca, I have to tell you something. It is something I should have told you many years ago. What is it?
My real name is not Victoria Sterling Morrison. It is Victoria Catherine Sterling.
I do not see what difference that makes. Victoria took a long, deep breath. Sterling Steel Industries. Have you ever heard of that company? The big steel company? Yes, they are enormous. They are a sponsor for the Pittsburgh Symphony. Their name is on at least half the buildings in the downtown area. Rebecca's eyes grew wide with surprise. Wait a minute, Sterling. Is your original name Sterling? My grandfather's name was Thomas Sterling. He started Sterling Steel with nothing and made it one of the biggest manufacturing companies in America. My grandmother, Margaret, has been in charge since he passed away 15 years ago. Rebecca just stared at her for a very long moment. Are you trying to tell me that you are rich? I am trying to tell you my family is rich. Unbelievably rich. $8.7 billion in annual sales. Rich? Oh my gosh, Victoria, $8 billion. Rebecca slowly sank down into the bedroom's soft chair. And you did not tell me in 10 years of friendship. You never once mentioned that your family is in charge of a Fortune 500 company.
I left all of that behind when I was 22.
I wanted to build my own life and find a man who loved me for who I am, not for my family's wealth. So you were not honest with James about your past. I simply left out the details. I let him know my family was in business, that we were not close, and that I did not want to discuss it. He never asked for any more information. Rebecca sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to understand this new information. At last, she looked up with an expression Victoria could not quite figure out. He has no clue, does he? James has no idea about the person he is divorcing. Not a single clue. Vic, wow. Rebecca began to laugh, a sound that was a mix of shock and pure happiness. He believes he is getting rid of a poor, helpless wife, but he is actually about to fight an entire industrial empire. For the first time in days, Victoria smiled. You could say something like that. So what is your plan? I am returning home to Pittsburgh. I will have my baby there with a family that wants both of us. And I plan to teach James Morrison what really happens when you underestimate a woman from the Sterling family. Rebecca shot up her chair. I am going with you. Rebecca, you cannot just do that. The heck I cannot. You are preparing to start a corporate battle with your self-centered ex-husband, and you expect me to miss it? For 10 years I have waiting for someone to put James Morrison in his place. Victoria felt tears welling up. But they were not like the tears she cried that morning. These were tears of thankfulness and relief, and a feeling that was very much like hope. He thought he married a nobody, she whispered, repeating her grandmother's words. But he will be divorcing a Sterling. While they finished packing, Victoria saw her reflection in the mirror. Rebecca had been right. Her face had changed. The fear and insecurity she had lived with for 7 years had vanished, and in its place was something stronger and more determined. James Morrison believed he had cast off a burden, but he had actually awakened a giant. The main office of Sterling Steel Industries covered 4 city blocks in downtown Pittsburgh, a shining monument to American industry. The first building from the 1920s had been added over the years, but Margaret Sturz made sure to keep the original Art Deco lobby. It had high ceilings and wall paintings that showed the great era of steel making. Victoria was standing in that lobby for the first time in 7 years, and she could feel the pull of family history and duty all around her. Workers rushed by, and some of them looked twice when they saw her face from old company updates and family pictures in the executive hallways. Mrs. Sterling? A young woman in a perfectly fitted suit came toward her, looking very nervous. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I am Mrs. Sterling's new assistant. She is waiting for you inside the boardroom. The elevator trip to the 50th floor seemed to last forever, but also happened in an instant. Victoria saw her own image on the shiny steel doors, and she barely knew the person looking back. The unsure young woman who ran away from Pittsburgh 7 years before was gone. Now, there was someone who looked like she could command authority and instill fear. The main boardroom looked the same as it did when Victoria was a child. It had the same huge mahogany table, the same leather seats, and the same portraits of the Sterling men watching over the business. But there were new things, too. There were framed pictures of Margaret winning awards, pictures from ceremonies for new buildings, and handshake agreements that were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Margaret Sterling was sitting at the head of the conference table with reading glasses on, looking over some papers. David Harrison, the lawyer for the family, was in the seat next to her. He was surrounded by legal papers and files that could probably build or ruin fortunes. "Victoria," said Margaret without even looking up, "you have perfect timing. David was just telling me about the current financial state of Morrison Innovations." For 20 years, David Harrison had been the Sterling family's lawyer. He was a quiet man whose gentle manner hid one of the most brilliant legal minds in Pennsylvania. He had helped the family deal with hostile takeovers, environmental cases, and union problems with his usual calm skill. "Victoria, I should congratulate you on your marriage," he said with a hint of sarcasm, "but I think those congratulations might be too soon." "What did you discover, David?" He opened the file that was in front of him. "Morrison Innovations is a strong company for being built from scratch by James, but it is also very weak. 70% of its money comes from 3 big contracts, and all of them need to be renewed in the next 18 months. Their amount of debt suggests that they have been expanding too quickly for their finances to handle, and the most revealing thing is that James has been using money from the company to pay for his very fancy lifestyle." Victoria felt a small wave of doubt. Is that against the law? Not always, if it is recorded correctly as executive pay or as a real business cost. But James has been very clever with his accounting. The trips on the private jet with Miss Delacroix were listed as business trips. The jewelry he bought was labeled as gifts for clients. The expensive hotel rooms were called temporary company housing. Margaret finally looked up from her papers. "So, your husband has been using his company like his own personal wallet, and that makes our case much stronger." "I do not see how." David leaned in closer. "Victoria, when you agreed to that prenup, you were signing as Victoria Sterling, a regular citizen with very little money. But Victoria Sterling, the future heir to the Sterling steel fortune, never agreed to any of that. The prenuptial agreement is based on a false statement of your financial reality." The meaning of his words hit Victoria with great force. "Are you saying the prenup is not real?" "It is more than that," Margaret said, as she took off her reading glasses. "It means that James agreed to a marriage contract based on lies. He was under the impression he was marrying a woman with no money or important family. The agreement was made to keep his money safe from a gold digger, but instead he married a woman whose family could purchase his whole business with their spare change." Victoria fell into one of the leather seats, her thoughts moving quickly. "But I was the one who decided not to tell him about my family. Does that not make me just as responsible? From a legal standpoint?" "No," David answered. "You do not have to reveal your family's money before you get married unless someone asks you directly. James did not look into your past well enough to find out about your family. That mistake is on him, not you." "Also," Margaret said with a pleased look, "we found some very interesting facts about James's time with Miss Delacroix. It seems their affair started right after your first anniversary, not 3 months ago, like he said." Victoria felt a sharp pain in her heart. "How could you know that?" "We have hotel bills, credit card bills, and copies of text messages. James has been extremely sloppy in hiding his actions." Margaret's smile was so sharp it could cut through steel. "I think the correct legal phrase is adultery with the wasteful spending of shared marriage money," David agreed. "In California, that has a major effect on the divorce outcome. James spent shared money to pay for his affair, and that gives you the right to demand that money back, along with extra payments for damages." Victoria gazed around the boardroom at the pictures of her ancestors. They had built an empire from the ground up and survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and many business fights. She recalled how cruel James had been that morning. He just assumed that she had no money and no other choices. "What about Morrison Innovations? You mentioned we own 41%. "Yes, through different shell corporations and investment accounts. James does not know that the biggest owner of his company is the grandmother of the wife he left. Margaret collected her papers, which leads us to our next choice, Victoria. What is your endgame here? I need to know my child will be safe. James has to learn his actions have repercussions, and he must know who he misjudged. Some might call it revenge. Victoria corrected herself. I want justice. Margaret rose and moved to the massive windows, looking out over Pittsburgh and the rivers that were the city's lifeblood. Victoria, we have a few options. We could reveal his shady finances and bankrupt his company, or we can use our shares to fire him and put our own people in charge. We could also tie him up in court for years until he loses everything he has. Or we can give him a clean way out. We buy his shares for a fair price and let him keep his dignity. He would have enough to begin again somewhere new. Margaret turned to her granddaughter. It is your decision, Victoria, but this choice will impact your child. James was a terrible husband, but he is still the father of your baby. Just then, Victoria felt her baby kick, as if reacting to its father's name. She thought this life she had wanted so badly. She had been ready to give up her inheritance for that suburban dream. But none of it was true. James never loved her as she had loved him. But she could ensure her child would not pay for their mistakes. I want him to understand, she said at last. I want James to realize who I am and what he has lost. But his ruin is not my goal. I want him to make his own choice. A slight smile on Margaret's face showed she was not surprised. David, prepare an offer to buy the rest of James Morrison's shares. Offer the fair market price. No penalties and an easy way out. But if he refuses, Mr. Morrison will discover the cost of challenging a family that has not lost a battle in a century. As Victoria left the headquarters that day, she felt a sense of peace. For 7 years, she had not been her true self. At last, she was showing herself again. James wanted to divorce someone unimportant. Now he would be dealing with an empire. In his office, James Morrison looked at the legal papers that shattered his perfect life. The letter was from Blackstone Pearson Associates, an elite Pittsburgh law firm. Its message was both baffling and horrifying. Read this again, Marcus, he said to his business partner. His partner looked just as dumbfounded. Marcus Reed was his college roommate, his best man, and the first to believe in his idea for a company. At 38, he was the calm one to James's ambitious nature. Marcus read slowly. It says Sterling Steel Industries wants to buy Morrison Innovations. A private purchase. They want all the shares, even yours, for a fair price decided by an outside expert.
James said the name again. Sterling Steel. I do not know them. I do, Marcus said, putting the paper down and grabbing his laptop. They are massive, James. Like Fortune 500 massive. They do steel, manufacturing, and construction right here in Pittsburgh. Why would they want a tech company? To grow into new areas. Billionaires do what they want. Marcus found the Sterling Steel website, and they both looked at the company details. My God, James, check out these figures. $8.7 billion a year. They are in 12 states and have 40,000 workers. Cold feeling grew in James's gut. This cannot be right. How would a company so big know about us? Someone let them know we are here. Marcus leaned back, thinking hard. James, this offer is not random. It is very precise. And the timing matches your divorce. A person with a lot of money and influence wants your business. Right now. The idea struck James like a punch. Do you think Victoria did this? I think her maiden name is very revealing. You should probably search for Victoria Sterling before you guess what your wife can do. James went to his computer and searched for Victoria Sterling. His hands started to tremble at the first search result. The headline read, Sterling Steel Heiress is back in Pittsburgh after a 7-year absence. A photo showed Victoria at a formal event in a beautiful black dress. She stood with an older woman, Margaret Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Steel Industries. Victoria seemed sure of herself, graceful, and nothing like the scared pregnant woman he had just divorced 2 days ago. He whispered, she inherits Sterling Steel. Marcus looked over his shoulder at the screen. Oh, James. Oh my. You married the granddaughter of Thomas Sterling. He created one of the biggest industrial empires in America, and you divorced her when she was 8 months pregnant. James kept scrolling, seeing stories about her family's power and charity work. Each search result showed a level of money and influence he could not comprehend. How could I have been so blind? She never told you, that is how. Seriously, James, reflect on it.
What do you really know about her past or her family? James thought back to when they first met. Victoria was always unclear about her family, saying they were not close and she avoided the topic. He thought it was just normal family problems, like arguments over personality or politics. He said weakly, "She told me her family owned a business and that they fought, so she wanted to be independent." Independent, sure. This woman has billions and decided to be a museum worker for $40,000 a year. Marcus sounded like he could not believe it. "James, she was running from her fortune and you never asked why." Just then, James's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer. "Mitchell, I hope you have something good to tell me." "James, we have to meet now. Come to my office and bring all your company's financial records." "What is the problem?" "The problem is your wife hired David Harrison for the divorce." "Who is that?" "Just the priciest divorce lawyer in the state. He is the guy big companies hire when they might go under." "James, his fee just to start is more than most people make in a year." When the call ended, James just stared at the screen. He tried to grasp how badly he had messed up. He thought his wife was weak and had nothing. Instead, he had started a fight with an industrial dynasty. Marcus asked, "So what is your plan?" "I have no idea. I will call Victoria. Perhaps I can say it was all a big mistake." Marcus looked at him with deep sympathy. "James, you filed for divorce from your 8 months pregnant wife to marry a 25-year-old actress. I am pretty sure there is nothing to misunderstand here." An assistant knocked and rushed in, her face red with excitement. "Mr. Morrison, Channel 7 News is here. They want to ask about your wife." "About my wife?" "Yes, Victoria Sterling. She announced she is going back to her family's company. The news is calling her the long-lost heiress. They want to ask about your marriage, the split, and if you are going to work for Sterling Steel." The room seemed to spin around James. "Tell them I have nothing to say. We are not giving any interviews." When the assistant was gone, Marcus shook his head. "The wildest thing is, if you had been a good husband, you would be joining one of the richest families in the country. But you gave it all up for an actress who is likely planning how to leave you." James pictured Amber. He remembered how thrilled she was about his $40 million company. She dreamed they would be a famous power couple. $40 million felt like a lot of money next to other tech founders. But next to $8.7 billion, it was nothing. Just then, his phone vibrated with a text from a number he did not know. The text said, "James, let us talk. This can be peaceful." It was from Victoria. He looked at her words and thought of the woman he married 5 years ago. He remembered quiet Victoria, who liked being home more than going to parties. The Victoria who was happy with their simple life and never asked for fancy gifts. This was the same Victoria who could have purchased his company and not even noticed the money was gone. "Marcus, I have made a terrible, life-altering mistake." Marcus replied, "Yes, James, I agree." Outside the office window, the city of Los Angeles stretched out, a place of big dreams and endless ambition. For 15 years, James had built his business. He gave up friends and his own joy for success. And now he knew that real power was in his own home the whole time. But he was too arrogant and foolish to see it. His phone rang. It was Amber. "James, my love, I just saw you on the news. Is it real? Is Victoria actually a billionaire?" James stared at the offer on his desk. He looked at the search results on his screen. Then he looked at the future he had just thrown away. "Amber, it is true." The total silence from his mistress on the phone told him everything. The boardroom at Sterling Steel had seen world leaders and powerful men. But Victoria was sure it had never felt like this. The room was thick with tension, regret, and a quiet simmering anger. James Morrison sat across the table, his lawyer beside him, looking like a man who just realized his world was gone. He had lost weight since they last talked just 3 days ago. His fine suit could not hide the deep exhaustion in his eyes. Victoria sat in her grandfather's old chair. Margaret Sterling was on her right, and David Harrison was on her left. Behind them, portraits of past Sterling family leaders seemed to watch with silent judgment. "Victoria," James began, his voice shaky and quiet. "You look good." "Thank you," she replied politely. Her tone was cool and distant, like she was talking to a stranger. "I believe you received our offer to buy your company." "Yes," James said, his eyes darting around the powerful room. "Yes, I did," he admitted. "This is not how I thought Thoughts Talk would go." Margaret Sterling spoke for the first time. "Mr. Morrison, What were you expecting? I thought we would meet at a coffee shop, or maybe a lawyer's office. I expected to talk about our baby and dividing our things. He stared right at Victoria. I never imagined my wife was the heir to a huge American fortune. Your estranged wife, Victoria corrected him softly. And James, I am not the heir. I am the heiress. There is a big difference. David Harrison then opened the file that was on the table.
Mr. Morrison, we have a very generous offer for you. Sterling Steel is prepared to buy your last 59% of Morrison Innovations.
The price will be fair and set by an independent group. You will have enough money to begin a new life somewhere else. James's lawyer, a nervous man named Mitchell, seemed to regret taking this case. He leaned in and asked, "And what if Mr. Morrison turns down our offer?" Margaret said smoothly. "Then Sterling Steel will use its power as the main shareholder. We will reorganize Morrison Innovations to fit our plans. That may or may not include keeping Mr. Morrison as its leader." The threat was so polite it took just a second to feel its cold sting. "Are you saying you would fire me from my own company?" "We are saying we would fire you from our company." Victoria clarified. "Morrison Innovations stopped being your company 2 years ago. That is when my family started buying your shares through different companies." "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why lie to me for 5 years? Why hide who you are?" Victoria paused, her hand on her pregnant belly. "Because I wanted someone to love me for who I am, not for my family's money. For 22 years, I watched people change the second they heard my last name. I hoped there was a man out there who could just love Victoria, not the Sterling heiress. But you never let me try to love all of you. She chose for both of us. Did I?" Victoria's voice was calm, but there was strength beneath it. "Tell me, James, you've got Cashley's money when we met. What would be different?" "Nothing," he insisted. "It would have all been the same." "Really? You would not have been sweeter or tried harder to win me over?" Victoria leaned in a little. "You would not have seen dollar signs instead of the woman you said you loved?" James started to argue, but then stopped. He knew the truth was ugly. Knowing about her money would have changed everything. He would have chased her harder, all as a strategy to get to her family's wealth. "You see," Margaret said, pleased, "my granddaughter knows people better than you thought. But you lied to me for 5 years. "I never lied," Victoria cut in. "I said my family had a business. I said we were not close. I said I did not want to talk about it. Every word I told you was true." David Harrison laid some papers on the table. "Mr. Morrison, we also found some problems with how you managed the company's money. You used company funds for personal things. You played games with your own salary. And you seemed to use business assets to pay for your lifestyle." James's face turned red. "Those were valid business costs. Were trips on a private jet with Miss Delacroix for business? Were jewelry purchases for business? Were hotel rooms for your affairs business expenses?" David's voice was calm, but each question was a sharp blow. "I can explain all of that." "I am sure you can," Margaret said. "The real question is if the government will accept your explanations. The IRS and the SEC might be very interested in how you keep your books." The silence in the room was heavy. James looked at the portraits of powerful men, then at the wife he had underestimated, and finally at the future he had completely ruined. "Victoria, I have to ask," he said quietly. "Did you know all along? When we got married, did you know your family would one day buy my company?" Victoria looked him straight in the eye. "No, James. My grandmother bought those shares without telling me. It was to protect me and our child. I only found out 3 days ago. But you called her. After I gave you divorce papers, you asked your family for help." "Yes, I did," she said, her voice getting stronger. "After 5 years of trying to be the woman you wanted, after 5 years of making myself smaller for you, I remembered who I am. I called my grandmother because you treated our marriage like a business deal. So I decided to treat it like one, too." James stared at the papers, at the numbers that stood for 15 years of his hard work. The offer was good. More than fair, but taking it meant admitting that powerful people could buy everything he had ever built. "What will happen to my company if I take the deal?" "It will become a part of Sterling Steel Industries," Margaret answered. "We will keep the Morrison name employees. Your company will run just as it does now, but with more money and better opportunities. And if I say no, Then you will see what happens when a man with $40 million fights a family with $8 billion. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. James, you have been playing a simple game of checkers. We have been playing a complex game of chess. You can take our kind offer, or you can learn just how completely you are outmatched. James's lawyer whispered in his ear. James nodded slowly. I need some time to think about your offer. Of course, Victoria said. Take all the time you want. But James, yes? Our baby is coming in 3 weeks. I would like to have this all finished before then. I want to focus on more important things than fixing the huge mess you made of our lives. As James and his lawyer stood up to go, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace. For 5 years, she tried to be the wife James wanted. Now, he was finally seeing the strong woman she had always been. Victoria, he said from the door, for what it is worth, I am so sorry. I am sorry I did not truly see you, and I am sorry I threw away something that could have been amazing. Victoria simply nodded. Some apologies are just too late to fix anything, and some mistakes are just too big to be forgiven. After James was gone, Margaret looked at her granddaughter with pride. That was very well done, my dear. Very well done. Victoria looked out the window at the Pittsburgh skyline, the city her family helped build. Grandmother, do you think I am being too cruel to him? My dear, you're being just as tough as you need to be. James Morrison made his choices. Now he must live with them. Margaret gathered her papers. The only question now is, what are you going to do with your new freedom? Victoria smiled, feeling the baby kick. I think I will build something incredible. Something that will make both you and grandfather very proud. You already have, Margaret replied softly. You already have. Miles away, Amber DeLoqua sat in her apartment, staring at her computer in absolute shock. The search results for Victoria Sterling just kept appearing, each one worse than the last. The headlines were getting worse with every refresh. A steel heiress was back in Pittsburgh after a 7-year absence. Victoria Sterling was taking over her family's industrial empire. One article called her the prodigal daughter. Her phone had been buzzing for 2 straight hours. She stopped answering after the 3rd call from a celebrity magazine, asking about the husband of the Sterling steel heiress. The reality of her new situation was becoming a nightmare. She was now the other woman in a massive public scandal. James walked in at 6:30 that evening. He looked worn out and 20 years older than 36. His hair was a mess, his tie was loose, and he looked like a man who had been blindsided by the truth. You look awful, Amber said, pouring a large glass of wine. I feel awful, James replied. He crashed onto her white sofa, the same one where they had toasted to Victoria's ignorance just 3 days before. Amber, he said, your wife can buy us both and not even notice the expense. Yes, James, I think we need to talk about that. He looked at her, suddenly alert. How much do you know? I know Victoria Sterling is the granddaughter of Thomas Sterling, the man who built an $8 billion empire. I also know her grandmother, Margaret, is a legend in American industry. I know that your wife lived like a normal person while she was sitting on a gigantic fortune. A fortune that makes your tech company seem like a child's lemonade stand. James flinched at her harsh words. It is more complicated than that. Is it? Amber set her wine glass down slowly. From my point of view, it seems very simple. You left a billionaire heiress for an actress with a net worth of maybe $50,000. Even I understand those numbers, James. Amber continued. Victoria lied about her family our whole marriage. She never said a word about the money. How could I have known? Did you ask? Amber shot back. Did you ever ask about her family's money? Did you ever think it was strange that a woman with an Ivy League master's degree was happy making $40,000 a year? Amber's voice was rising. Did you ever think that was weird? Or that she never cared about money? She never asked for expensive things or seemed impressed by your wealth. James was silent for a long time. No, he finally said. I just thought she was different. More real than the other women I knew. More real? Is that what you thought? Amber started pacing the room in her silk dress. James, do you understand what this does to my career? To my name? What do you mean? He asked. I mean, I am now the woman who wrecked the marriage of an American billionaire. I am the gold digger who stole the husband of a pregnant woman. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what this industry does to women like me, especially when a baby is involved? James seemed genuinely puzzled. But you are beautiful and talented. You are ambitious. This does not change that. James, you sweet, naive man. This changes absolutely everything. Stopped and stared right at him. 3 days ago, I was with a tech guy worth $40 million. It was a good story. 2 successful people building a life. Now, I am the actress who ruined a perfect marriage for cash. Cash that is nothing compared to what his wife has. The weight of her words finally seemed to crush him. So, what are you telling me? I am saying that staying with you would be career suicide for me.
And probably financial ruin for you.
Amber's phone rang again. She looked at the screen. It is my agent. The 3rd call in an hour. She finally answered it. Richard, I know what you are going to say. Amber, we have to fix this right now. The gossip sites are calling you a royal homewrecker. This is not the kind of attention that gets you leading movie roles. I get it, she said. Do you? Because 3 casting agents have already called. They want to know if you are free for other woman parts. Small roles, Amber. The mistress, the secretary, the revenge girlfriend. That is what this is doing to your image. After she hung up, Amber looked at James with a hint of pity. My agent wants me to release a statement. I have to distance myself from you and say I regret hurting Victoria and her unborn child. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, James. I came to this city with nothing but a dream and a bus ticket. I have spent 7 years building this life, making contacts, creating opportunities. I will not let your personal crisis tear it all down. James stood up suddenly, his face red with shame. So that is it? You are just leaving me? I am protecting myself. Just like you protected yourself when you served your pregnant wife with divorce papers. Amber's voice was calm and all business now. James, you made a bet that your freedom was worth more than Victoria. I am making a bet that my career is worth more than you. But I love you, he pleaded. I gave up my marriage for you. You gave up your marriage for the idea of me, she corrected. For a younger woman who made you feel important. Amber walked to her bar and poured more wine, moving with a strange grace. But I never loved you, James. I loved what you could give me. Success, safety, and a ticket to a world I wanted to be in. The truth felt like a physical blow in the silent room. You never loved me. I loved the lifestyle. I loved the fancy dinners, the private flights, and the expensive gifts. I loved dating someone who mattered. Amber's honesty was sharp and precise. But love you? The man who would leave his pregnant wife for someone else? No, James. I never loved that person. James fell back onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. So I have lost it all. My wife, my company, and now you. You have not lost your company yet. Victoria's family made a very good offer to buy you out. How do you know about that? He asked, looking up. Because I called Victoria this afternoon. James stared at her. You what? I called your wife. I asked to meet. We had coffee. Amber's smile was sharp and confident. She is a lovely woman, by the way. Far more elegant than I imagined. What did you say to her? I told her the truth. That I went after you because I thought you were rich and powerful.
I told her I was truly sorry for the pain I caused her and her baby.
Amber drained her glass. And then Victoria Sterling made me an offer I could not turn down. What kind of offer? The kind that changes a person's life, James. The kind that showed me how small we have both been thinking. Before James could say another word, Amber's doorbell chimed. She glanced at her phone and smiled a real smile for the first time. That must be my ride to the airport. I have a meeting in Pittsburgh tomorrow. Pittsburgh? What is in Pittsburgh? My future, Amber said, grabbing her purse and coat. Victoria offered me something you never could, James. A chance to be part of something meaningful. James just watched, stunned, as the woman he lost everything for walked to the door. Amber, wait. We can fix this. We can find a way to... No, we cannot. She stopped in the doorway and looked back, almost with sympathy. James, you are about to learn about real power. It is not about having $40 million. Real power is having $8 billion and knowing how to use it. What did Victoria offer you? He asked. Amber's smile was bright with excitement. She offered me the lead role in Sterling Steel's new media company. I get to create and produce important projects. I have an unlimited budget and total creative freedom. She opened the door, letting in the cool night air.
She offered me everything I have ever wanted, James, and all I had to do was give you up.
After she was gone, James sat alone in her perfect apartment. The fancy furniture and art once felt like signs of their future. Now they just looked like props from a failed play. A play where he was the only loser. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria. "The offer is good until Friday, James. After that, we take a different path. Choose carefully." James looked around the empty apartment at the life he thought he wanted. A life that was now disappearing before his eyes. In just 3 days, he had lost his wife, his baby, his company, and his mistress. Victoria Sterling had said it perfectly. Every consequence. He was finally seeing what his looked like. The meeting room felt small and stuffy. It was nothing like the huge boardroom at Sterling Steel, but it was a neutral place for the final negotiation. James sat looking at Victoria. She seemed so different from the woman he had handed divorce papers to only a week ago. Victoria was wearing a dark blue suit that probably cost more than his car. Her hair was pulled back neatly, showing off her strong jawline and her sharp, intelligent green eyes. Even at 8 months pregnant, she radiated a quiet strength that made everyone in the room sit up a little straighter. To her right sat David Harrison, flanked by legal papers, wearing the smug look of a master chess player who had already won the game. James's lawyer Mitchell seemed to wish he was anywhere else. David started, "Mr. Morrison has had plenty of time to review our offer. We are here today to sign the final papers." James took a deep "Actually, I have decided to say no." A heavy silence filled the conference room. Victoria's face remained calm, but the air grew thick with tension, like the stillness before a storm. "I see," she said softly. "Can I ask for your reason?" "'Cause Morrison Innovations is everything to me. 15 years of 18-hour workdays, of giving up everything for a dream no one else saw." James's voice grew louder with every word. "I will not just give it away to a corporate empire."
Mitchell looked panicked. "James, maybe we should talk about this." "No."
James raised a hand. "I have made my decision. I will fight for my company in court, even if it takes years." Victoria shot a look at David Harrison, and James saw a hint of what looked like pity in her eyes. "James," she said gently, "I hoped we could settle this peacefully, for our child. But if you want a battle, you will get one." "What are you talking about?" David opened a large folder and laid out several documents. "Mr. Morrison, we have conducted a full audit of your company's finances, and the findings are very interesting." A knot formed in James's stomach. "What kind of audit?" "The kind that shows you have been using company money for your personal life. The kind that proves you faked expense reports and likely cheated on your taxes." David's voice was cold and professional, the kind that often leads to serious legal trouble. Mitchell leaned in, whispering urgently, "Hold on a second. We have hotel bills from your trips with Miss Delacroix charged to the company. We also have jewelry receipts for $60,000, marked as client gifts, but with no clients to be found. We have records of you using the private jet for vacations, but claiming it was for business," David said without emotion. "Should I go on?" All the color drained from James's face. "Those were business expenses. Were they? Can you prove how a romantic trip to Mexico helped your company? Or can you name the clients who received that expensive jewelry?" The room was silent, except for the sound of James' heavy breathing. "But that is not everything," Victoria added quietly. "James, we also know you lied about your profits to get money from investors. You inflated your user numbers, and you claimed to have contracts that never existed." James felt his world start to crumble. "How could you know all that?" "Because we have been watching your company for 2 years. We know everything, James. Every lie, every secret, every shortcut you took to make your company look better than it was." Mitchell was now sweating, scribbling notes as fast as he could. "James, we have to talk about a deal." "It gets worse," David said, showing no mercy. "We found out you used Victoria's social security number to get a business loan without her permission. That is a serious crime, Mr. Morrison. A federal crime." He felt like his heart was breaking. "Victoria, we can fix this. I know I made some mistakes, but mistakes?" For the first time, Victoria's calm expression cracked, showing the deep hurt and anger she felt.
"James, you did not make mistakes.
You made choices to lie to investors, to avoid taxes, and to steal from your own business. And you did all of this while sending me divorce papers so you could marry your new girlfriend. I never wanted this to happen." "Yes, you did. Victoria's voice was like soft velvet covering hard steel. You wanted all of it, James. You wanted to throw me away. You wanted to use company money for your affair. You wanted to lie to everyone who got in your way. James looked at the faces in the room, all staring at him with disappointment and disgust. He thought of Amber, his mistress, starting her new life in Pittsburgh with his money. He thought of the phone calls from reporters wanting to know about his connections to a powerful family. He thought about the federal investigations David Harrison had just threatened him with. "What do you want?" he asked in a low voice. "We want you to face the truth," Victoria answered. "Sign away your company, take our money, and start a new life, far away from here. And if I refuse," David Harrison gave a cruel smile, "then we give all of this evidence to the government. You will spend the next 10 years in court with no money, and your name will be ruined. The choice is yours, Mr. Morrison." James felt the last of his fight leave him. He had been completely outplayed by people he never truly understood. "How much time do I have to think about it?" Victoria looked at her expensive watch. "My water broke 20 minutes ago, James. My contractions are now 5 minutes apart. So you have until my driver gets me to Presbyterian Hospital." Suddenly, the room was full of activity. Mitchell shot up from his chair, sending papers flying. David started packing his briefcase. Victoria stayed seated. Her breathing was steady but difficult. "Are you in labor?" James asked in disbelief. "Right at this moment?" "Yes, right now. This means our son will be born into the world you are creating for him." Victoria let David help her to her feet. She moved with care but also with strength. "Choose carefully, James. This will be the last choice you ever make that involves me." James looked at the woman he married 5 years ago. He thought he knew everything about her. Now, she was having his child while taking his entire life apart. "Victoria, I will sign the papers." Her voice softened, sounding almost kind. "Sign them and leave. Start over somewhere new. Be the kind of man our son can look up to, even if you could not be the husband I needed." Another contraction started, and Victoria held on to David's arm, her breathing sharp and focused. When it was over, she looked at James with a hint of forgiveness. "I loved you," she said, her voice clear. "I loved you so much I gave up the life I was born into. I loved you so much I hid from my family for 7 years. I thought our marriage was more important than money or power or my family's name. But you did not love me enough to be honest. You did not love me enough to keep your promises. You did not love me enough to show me any kindness when you decided you were done with me." She stood up straighter, her voice getting stronger even though she was in pain. "So now, you have to live with your choices." James took the pen from Mitchell, his hand shaking. The papers were on the table, representing 15 years of his work and all the dreams he ever had. "If I sign this, what happens next?" "You walk away a rich man, with no criminal record and a new beginning," David answered. "If you do not sign, you become a man on trial, with no money and a dark future." James thought about going to prison, about losing everything, about explaining to his son one day that his father was in jail. He thought about Amber in Pittsburgh, who was probably already moving on to someone else. With a trembling hand, he signed his name. Victoria smiled, and it completely changed her face. "Thank you, James. This is the smartest thing you have done in a long time. Will I get to see him? Our son? Of course. You are his father, and I want him to know you." Victoria's smile dimmed a little. "But James, will know you as the son of Victoria Sterling, the heir to the Sterling Steel Company, not as the son of the woman you thought I was." As David walked Victoria to the door, she stopped and looked back one more time. "Oh, and James, when you tell this story one day, make sure you tell the whole truth. Tell them you divorced a billionaire because you decided she was not good enough for you." The door clicked shut, leaving James alone with his lawyer. He had just signed away his life's work for a woman who never loved him, and lost a woman who had loved him enough to hide who she really was for 5 long years. The sun glittered on the Los Angeles skyline, a city built on fresh starts. James Morrison came here 15 years ago with only a business idea on a napkin. He was leaving with a check for $38 million, knowing he had ruined the best thing in his life. He now understood that some lessons are incredibly expensive, and all the money in the world cannot fix certain mistakes. Thomas James Sterling was born on a Thursday night at 11:47, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's. He has announced his arrival with a powerful cry that echoed down the hospital hall, as if claiming his spot from his very first breath. In the quiet hours before morning, Victoria held her new son. She admired his perfect, tiny fingers and the knowing way he looked at her face. Margaret Sterling sat nearby, her usual serious expression softened with awe for her first great-grandson. "He is so beautiful, Victoria," Margaret said quietly. "Just absolutely perfect."
"He reminds me of grandfather,"
Victoria whispered, gently touching Hearn's face. "The same strong jaw, that same determined look. I bet he has the same fighting spirit." Margaret reached out to touch the baby's soft hair. "Thomas James Sterling, your grandfather would have been so very proud." In a corner chair, Rebecca Hayes was asleep, having refused to go home. She had been by Victoria's side the whole time, holding her hand and cheering her on through the long night. Even while sleeping, she had a smile of victory and justice on her face. A gentle knock broke the calm. David Harrison came in with coffee, looking tired from a night of handling legal work. "How is everyone doing?" he asked softly. "Feeling victorious," Victoria answered, smiling at her son. "How did James handle the last of the paperwork?" "He was calmer than I thought. He signed every document without a fight, including the agreement about custody and privacy." David sat down, his voice calm and steady. He asked if he could come today to see his son. Victoria thought for a moment before asking, "What do you think, grandmother?" Margaret's face was hard to read. "That decision is yours alone, my dear. You have earned the right to set any rules you feel are right." "Yes," Victoria finally said. "He can visit. He is Thomas's father, no matter what happened. But David, please make sure he knows the rules. He is visiting the son of Victoria Sterling, heir to Sterling Steel Industries, not the son of the woman he believed he married." David nodded. "I will make that completely clear." Later that morning, Victoria looked out at the Pittsburgh skyline while she fed her son, feeling a deep sense of peace. The city her family helped build spread out before her, a symbol of 5 generations of sterling strength. James showed up at noon with flowers. He looked like a man heading to his own doom. He had lost weight and his nice suit could not hide the deep tiredness in his eyes. "Victoria," he said softly from the doorway, "thank you for allowing me to come." "Of course. Come and meet your son." James walked toward the bed slowly, as if he were afraid to disturb the peaceful scene. When Victoria put Thomas in his arms, James's tough exterior finally broke. "He is amazing," he whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Completely amazing." "His name is Thomas James Sterling," Victoria said with kindness, "named after my grandfather and you." James looked at her, surprised. "You used my name. I used part of your name. Because whatever our problems, you are still his father. And I want him to know that." For a long time, James just held his son, studying every little detail of his tiny face. When Thomas's eyes opened, James gasped, "He has your eyes, and your determined chin." Victoria's voice was gentle but strong. "James, I want you to understand that Thomas will always know who you are. You will have fair visitation, access in his life, and a chance to know him. Even after what I did, especially after what you did. I want our son to from our choices, James. Both the good ones and the bad ones." James slowly and unwillingly handed Thomas back to Victoria. "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" "I know I do not deserve to be forgiven." James's voice was almost a whisper. "I know I threw away something wonderful because I was too selfish to appreciate it, but I need you to know that I am sorry. I am truly and deeply sorry for all the pain I caused you." Victoria looked at his face and saw that his regret was real this time. "I know you are, James. And I forgive you. How can you do that? How can you be so kind when I was so awful? Because staying angry would only end up hurting our son, and he deserves more from us." Victoria held Thomas a little closer. "Besides, you gave me a gift I never expected." "What gift is that?" "You gave me my own life back, my family, my home, my sense of purpose." Victoria's smile was bright with a new kind of wisdom. "If you had not filed for divorce, I might never have found the strength to return to being my true self." James was silent for a while. "So what will you do now?" "I am going to raise our son. I will learn to run Sterling Steel Industries from the best businesswoman in the country. And I am going to build a great future for him." Victoria then looked toward the door where David Harrison was waiting. And for myself, I think there are some new and interesting things to explore. James saw where she was looking and nodded. He is a good man. He has been in love with you for a long time, has he not? David has been my friend and my protector for many years. What happens next between us is something we will discover. A nurse came in to check on them, which James saw as his signal to depart. He paused at the door and turned around one last time. Victoria, when Thomas is old enough to ask about us, what are you going to tell him? Victoria thought about it. I will tell him that his parents were very much in love. But I will also say that sometimes his love is not enough when two people want very different things. I will tell him his father is a smart and driven man who created something incredible from nothing. And I will say that his mother found the strength to make the right choice for them both. You will not tell him about my mistakes? Thomas will learn about actions and consequences by watching how we live our lives from now on. Our actions will teach him more than any story, James. After James was gone, David came in holding a small velvet box. Victoria, I need to ask you something. David, the divorce was just finalized yesterday. Do you not think this is a bit fast? I have wanted to ask you this for 15 years, he answered with a grin, ever since you were 14 years old and argued with me about business law at a family dinner. Victoria laughed, and the sound was happy and free. I was a very serious child. You were an amazing child who became a remarkable woman. David opened the box. Inside was a simple and beautiful diamond ring.
Victoria Catherine Sterling, will you marry me?
Are you asking the heir, or are you asking the woman? I am asking the person I have loved since she was a teenager, debating lawyers 3 times her age. I am asking the woman who was brave enough to leave her legacy behind and wise enough to return when it truly counted. Victoria looked down at her sleeping son, then up at the man who had always been there for her family. Yes, David, I will marry you. As David put the ring on her finger, Victoria felt her new life click perfectly into place. She was finally home after 7 long years. She had a son to love, a family business to lead, and a future to create with a man who loved her for who she was, not for her money. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the boardroom of Sterling Steel. She was explaining expansion plans to the top executives. Thomas was sleeping in a small bus tent next to her chair. His little noises made the serious business leaders smile warmly. Outside the huge windows, she could see the Pittsburgh skyline. It had changed over the years, but it was still the city that built American industry. She would soon marry David in the same church where 5 generations of her family had gotten married. She planned to teach her son about both the benefits and the duties that came with their name and their fortune. James had opened a new consulting company in Seattle. He used his money to support green technology projects. He came to see Thomas once a month, and he and Victoria had become something like friends. Heiress Film Company, which was funded by Sterling Steel, had just been nominated for 3 Emmy Awards for a film about women in factories. It seemed that everyone had finally found their rightful place. Later that night, Victoria put Thomas to bed in the nursery. She thought about the path that led them to this point. She started out as a woman running from her future, hiding who she was, just to find a normal kind of love. In the end, she became her true self, completely and finally. And she had a love that was special. Sweet dreams, my little one, she whispered to her son. You will do great things in this world one day. I can just feel it. Beyond the windows, the Pittsburgh lights shone like stars. In the distance, the furnaces that built her family's wealth were working, turning raw metal into something strong and lasting. Victoria Sterling was finally home, and her story was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story about getting what you deserve, please hit the like button. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Victoria's amazing change. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss our next story about justice. Please share this video with anyone who knows it is a mistake to underestimate a quiet person.